The restaurant was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes with a lot of money and a lot of fear. Choi Tae-Hyun sat at the center table, his black suit sharp enough to cut glass. He moved his silver fork with perfect timing, ignoring the nervous whispers of the businessmen around him. To the city. He was the Ice King, a man whose heart had frozen solid a long time ago. Then the air changed. A small, shaking hand reached out from the shadows of a nearby pillar. It happened in a heartbeat. A crumpled piece of paper landed on the white tablecloth, right next to Tae-Hyun's wine glass. A young boy with messy hair and wide, watery eyes stared at him for a split second. The boy looked like a rabbit caught in a trap. Before Tae-Hyun could speak, a large man in a cheap leather jacket grabbed the boy's arm and yanked him away into the crowd. In an instant, Tae-Hyun's bodyguards were on their feet. Their hands moved inside their jackets, reaching for weapons. They stepped forward, forming a wall of muscle around their boss. "Boss, stay down," his lead guard, Minho, hissed. "It could be a distraction. We need to clear the room." Tae-Hyun didn't move. He didn't dive for cover or call for help. Instead, he reached out with two long fingers and picked up the paper. It was warm from the boy's hand. He smoothed it out against the table. The word was written in red crayon. Shaky and desperate. "Help." There was a small smudge of blood on the corner of the paper. It was fresh. "Stand down," Tae-Hyun said. His voice was low, like the growl of a distant storm. "But sir, the protocol," Minho started. "I said stand down." Tae-Hyun stared at the messy handwriting. To his guards, it was just a piece of trash, a trick, or a nuisance. But as Tae-Hyun looked at it, the expensive restaurant seemed to fade away. The smell of expensive steak was replaced by the smell of wet pavement and old exhaust fumes. He wasn't a powerful boss anymore. For a second, he was 10 years old again, hiding in a dark closet in Seoul. He could almost feel the cold wood against his back. He remembered watching through the door cracks as men in dark suits dragged his father away because of a debt that could never be paid. He remembered having a note just like this one, but he had been too afraid to give it to anyone. He had stayed silent, and his world had ended that night. The Ice King felt a crack in his chest. He looked toward the door where the boy had disappeared. The man who had taken him was Marcus Matt's man, a low-level thug who didn't follow the rules of the city. Tae-Hyun folded the note carefully and tucked it into his breast pocket, right over his heart. He stood up, knocking his chair back. The businessmen at the other tables went pale, wondering who was about to die. "Find out where that man took the boy," Tae-Hyun ordered. "Sir?" Minho asked, confused. "We have the meeting with the shipping company in 10 minutes. Millions are on the line." Tae-Hyun adjusted his cuffs and looked his guard in the eye. The coldness was there, but there was something else now, a sharp, burning focus. "The meeting can wait," Tae-Hyun said, stepping toward the exit. "Someone just handed me a debt that I've been waiting 30 years to pay. We're going to find that boy." He walked out of the restaurant, his long coat snapping behind him like a cape. Outside, the city lights were bright. But Tae-Hyun was looking for the shadows. The predator was awake, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't hunting for profit. He was hunting for a ghost. The cold rain of the city splashed against the windows of Tae-Hyun's black car, but he didn't see the modern streets of the city. As he leaned back against the leather seat, the sound of the rain turned into the gray, misty drizzle of Seoul 30 years ago. In his mind, he was back in a tiny, cramped apartment. The air smelled like old cooking oil and damp wood. A young Tae-Hyun sat on the floor, trying to finish his homework by the light of a single flickering bulb. His father sat at the small kitchen table, his head in his hands. There were stacks of yellow papers spread out in front of him, bills that couldn't be paid and warnings from people who didn't take no for an answer. "Don't worry." Tae-Hyun, his father had whispered that night, his voice cracking. "Everything will be fine. Just keep studying." But everything was not fine. A loud, heavy thud shook the thin wooden door. Tae-Hyun's heart jumped into his throat. His father stood up quickly, his face turning as white as a sheet. He grabbed Tae-Hyun by the shoulders and pushed him toward a small closet filled with old coats. "Stay inside," his father commanded. "Do not make a sound. No matter what happens, do not come out." Tae-Hyun squeezed into the dark space. The smell of mothballs and dust filled his nose. Through a thin crack in the closet door, he watched as 3 men kicked the apartment door off its hinges. They didn't look like businessmen. They looked like giants in dark jackets, their faces hard and mean. They didn't shout. They didn't have to. The leader of the group walked up to Tae-Hyun's father and grabbed him by the shirt. "The time is up," the man said. Tae-Hyun's father begged. He cried. He promised to work 3 jobs. He promised to pay every cent back with interest. But the men didn't care about promises. They dragged him toward the door. Tae-Hyun reached into his pocket and felt a small piece of paper he had prepared earlier. He had written a note to the neighbors, asking for help, hoping someone would hear them. He gripped the note so hard his knuckles turned white. He wanted to jump out. He wanted to scream. He wanted to hand the note to anyone who would listen. But his legs felt like lead. Fear held him down like a heavy chain. He watched through the crack as his father's shoes disappeared out the door. The apartment went silent, except for the sound of the rain hitting the roof. His father never came back. That night, the boy who cried in the closet died. A new Tae-Hyun was born in the shadows. He realized that in a world of wolves, you either had to be the hunter or the prey. He promised himself that he would never be the one hiding in the dark again. He would never be the one holding a note, waiting for a hero who would never show up. He spent the next 30 years building a wall of ice around his heart. He became the strongest, the richest, and the most feared man in the underworld. He thought he had forgotten that terrified boy. He thought the Ice King had no room for ghosts. The car hit a bump, snapping Tae-Hyun back to the present. He reached into his pocket and felt the crumpled note from the restaurant. The paper was rough against his skin. He wasn't that helpless boy anymore. He had the power now. He had the men, the money, and the strength to do what no one had done for him. "Drive faster," Tae-Hyun said, his eyes glowing with a dark fire. He wasn't just going to find the boy. He was going to finish the fight he was too small to win 30 years ago. Tae-Hyun did not look at the bright city lights outside his car window. Instead, he stared at the small piece of paper in his hand. He tapped his fingers on the armrest, a signal his men knew well. It meant the Ice King was no longer just thinking. He was hunting. "Minho," Tae-Hyun said, his voice as sharp as a blade. "I want a name. I want to know who that boy belongs to and who took him from that restaurant." Minho nodded and opened a slim laptop. His fingers flew across the keys. In the world of the underground, information was more valuable than gold. Tae-Hyun had eyes and ears everywhere, in the kitchens of the finest hotels, in the dark corners of the docks, and inside the police stations. Within minutes, the digital web began to pull in the truth. "The boy is Lucas Reed," Minho reported. "His father is Daniel Reed. He used to be a decent man, a carpenter, but he got into trouble with the wrong people. He borrowed money to pay for his wife's hospital bills. When he couldn't pay it back, the debt was sold." Tae-Hyun leaned forward. "Sold to whom?" "Marcus Matt," Minho replied, his face darkening. "A bottom feeder. He doesn't have a code, boss. He doesn't care about honor or the rules of the city. He specializes in collateral. He doesn't just take the money. He takes whatever hurts the most." Tae-Hyun felt a cold anger rising in his chest. He knew Marcus Matt. Marcus was a man who enjoyed the fear of the weak. He was the kind of person Tae-Hyun's father had died running from. To Marcus, a young boy like Lucas wasn't a human being. He was just a tool to make a father scream. "Marcus took Daniel Reed 3 days ago," Minho continued, reading from the screen. "He's holding him in an old warehouse near the shipyard. He let the boy go to the restaurant tonight under guard, just to show him how much power he has. It was a game. He wanted the boy to see the world he would never have again. Marcus had made a mistake. He thought he was playing a game with a helpless child, but he had accidentally invited a giant to the table. By letting Lucas get close enough to slip that note, Marcus had handed Tae-Hyun the key to his own destruction." Tae-Hyun looked at the smudge of blood on the note again. He thought about Daniel Reed, a man who just wanted to save his wife, now trapped in a dark room because of a debt he could never outrun. It was the same story Tae-Hyun had lived through, but this time, the ending was going to be different. "Marcus Matt thinks he is a wolf because he bites children," Tae-Hyun said quietly. "He is about to find out what a real predator looks like." He didn't need a meeting. He didn't need more money. He needed to settle a score that had been burning for 30 years. "Call the team," Tae-Hyun ordered. "Tell them we aren't going to the office. We're going to the docks. And tell them to bring the heavy gear. We aren't just collecting a debt tonight. We're erasing one." The car sped up, weaving through traffic like a black ghost. The hunt had begun. The car pulled into a private garage beneath a quiet building. The air was cold, and the smell of gasoline and damp concrete filled the space. Tae-Hyun stepped out of the vehicle, his face as still as a statue. Around him, his top enforcers were already waiting. They were tall, strong men who moved like shadows, dressed in dark suits that hid their weapons. Minho stepped forward, looking at his phone. The other men exchanged confused glances. Usually, when the Ice King called for a full strike team, it was to take over a shipping port or to deal with a rival billionaire. They were used to high-stakes wars involving millions of dollars. Boss, one of the older enforcers, Gene, said as he checked his handgun, "I've been looking into this Marcus Matt. He's a nobody. He runs a small-time loan business out of a dirty warehouse. He's a thug, not a player. Why are we wasting our best men on a guy like him? We could send a couple of rookies to scare him off." The other men nodded. To them, this felt like using a sledgehammer to crush a tiny ant. It didn't make sense for a man of Tae-Hyun's status to personally lead a raid against a low-level street criminal. They thought their time was too valuable for such a small fight. Tae-Hyun didn't answer right away. He walked over to a table where a map of the city's docks was spread out. He smoothed the edges of the map with the same calm hands that had held the boy's note. He didn't look angry, but the air around him felt heavy and dangerous. It was the kind of silence that made the men stop talking and stand up straighter. "Is he a nobody?" Tae-Hyun asked, his voice low and steady. "Yes, sir," Gene replied, sounding more cautious now. "He's just a bully who picks on people who can't fight back. He's not a threat to our business." Tae-Hyun turned to look at Gene. His eyes were dark and cold, like a deep lake in the middle of winter. "That is exactly why we are going," he said. "Marcus Matt thinks he can do whatever he wants because the people he hurts have no power. He thinks no one is watching. He thinks a father's life and a child's hope are things he can buy and sell." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled note. He laid it on the map, right over the location of the warehouse. The word "help" stared up at the men in bright red crayon. "Tonight, we aren't doing business," Tae-Hyun said. "Tonight, we are reminding this city that there is a difference between being a leader and being a monster. Marcus Matt thinks he is a predator. I am going to show him what happens when he bites something that can bite back." The enforcers looked at the note. They saw the blood on the corner and the shaky handwriting of a terrified child. The confusion in the room started to disappear, replaced by a grim understanding. They realized this wasn't about money or territory. It was about something their boss had kept hidden for a long time, a sense of justice that sat deep beneath the ice. Tae-Hyun checked his watch. "Marcus thinks he is safe because he is small," he whispered, more to himself than to his men. "He thinks no one cares about a boy like Lucas. He is wrong." He turned away from the table and headed toward the armored SUV. His resolve was like iron. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He was a force of nature moving toward a target. "Gear up," Minho shouted to the team, his voice full of sudden energy. "We move in 5 minutes. No mistakes. We're bringing that boy home." Tae-Hyun sat in the back of the car, watching the garage door rise. The predator had stirred, and the city was about to feel the chill. The warehouse smelled like salt water and rotting wood. High above, a single light bulb swung back and forth, casting long, shaky shadows against the metal walls. Lucas sat on a hard plastic crate in the center of the room, his knees pulled up to his chest. He tried to stay very still, but his shoulders wouldn't stop shaking. Every time the heavy door creaked, he jumped. Across from him, Marcus Matt sat behind a dusty desk, cleaning his fingernails with a small, silver pocket knife. He was a man who looked like he enjoyed being mean. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and he wore too much cheap cologne that made the air feel thick and hard to breathe. "You're a quiet little thing, aren't you?" Marcus said, his voice oily and loud in the empty space. He stood up and walked toward Lucas, the heels of his boots clicking on the concrete floor. "I saw you at that fancy restaurant. You looked like you were seeing a ghost. I hope you didn't try anything stupid while my man was looking the other way." Lucas looked down at his shoes. He thought about the man in the black suit, the man with the eyes like ice. He had slipped him the note, but now, in this dark, scary place, that moment felt like a dream. Why would a powerful man in a silk tie care about a boy in a dirty t-shirt? The hope he had felt for a second began to fade away, like a candle flickering in a drafty room. "My dad," Lucas whispered, his voice cracking. "Where is he?" Marcus laughed, a dry sound that had no joy in it. He reached out and tapped the blade of his knife against the crate Lucas was sitting on. Clink, clink, clink. "Your dad is busy learning a lesson about money," Marcus said. "He owes me a lot of it. And since he can't pay with cash, I have to keep you here to make sure he works extra hard to find it. You're what we call collateral, kid. You're just a piece of property until the debt is gone." Lucas felt a tear track down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly with the back of his hand. He didn't want this monster to see him cry. He looked around the warehouse. There were no windows, only piles of rusted machinery and old shipping crates. He felt small, smaller than he had ever felt in his life. He began to think that no one was coming. The Ice King probably threw the note in the trash. He probably didn't even read it. "Don't look so sad," Marcus mocked, leaning down so his face was just inches from the boy's. "Maybe if you're lucky. I'll let you see him through the bars later tonight. But if you keep shaking like that, I might get annoyed. And you don't want to see me when I'm annoyed." Marcus stood up and turned his back, walking toward a heavy iron door at the back of the room where Lucas's father was being held. He felt completely alone. The flickering light bulb above him seemed to be getting dimmer. Lucas closed his eyes and tried to remember his father's face. But all he could see was the dark, cold water of the harbor outside. He had tried to save his family with a scrap of paper and a red crayon. But now he realized how big the world was, and how little he mattered in it. His hope was almost gone, swallowed by the shadows of the warehouse. He didn't know that across the city, a fleet of black cars was tearing through the night, led by a man who never forgot a debt and never ignored a plea. The silence of the shipyard was broken by the low, steady hum of engines. Out of the darkness, four black SUVs appeared like sharks cutting through deep water. They didn't have their headlights on, moving only by the faint glow of the moon. The cars stopped 50 yards from the warehouse, their doors opening in perfect unison. Tae-Hyun stepped out into the cool night air. He didn't wear a helmet or heavy armor like his men. He simply adjusted his silk tie and pulled his black overcoat tight against his shoulders. Around him, his enforcers moved with the speed of professional athletes. They checked their suppressed rifles and clicked their communication headsets into place. "Thermal scan shows 8 targets inside," Minho whispered, looking at a small handheld screen. 6 are guards near the entrance. Marcus and the boy are in the back office. The father is in a basement cellar. Tae-Hyun looked at the warehouse. To anyone else, it was a fortress of rusted metal. To him, it was an insult. "Enter on my mark," he said. "Do not harm the boy. Do not harm the father. Everyone else is a ghost." With a sharp nod, the team moved. They didn't shout or kick down doors like common thugs. Instead, they used small, silent charges to pop the locks. Suddenly, the lights inside the warehouse flickered and died. Tae-Hyun's men had cut the power. Inside, Marcus's guards began to panic. "What's going on? Check the fuse box," one yelled. A second later, the sound of thwip-thwip filled the air. It was the sound of silenced shots hitting their marks. One by one, Marcus's men fell into the shadows without even knowing who was attacking them. It wasn't a fight, it was a harvest. Tae-Hyun walked through the front doors, as if he were entering his own office. He didn't duck or run. He walked with a slow, heavy rhythm that echoed off the metal walls. In the green glow of his men's night vision goggles, he looked like a shadow coming to life. Every time a guard tried to raise a weapon, a red laser that appeared on their chest, and they were gone before they could pull the trigger. "Boss, the path is clear," Minho signaled from the hallway. Tae-Hyun reached the heavy iron door of the back office. He could hear Marcus's voice inside, high and shaky with fear. Marcus was shouting into a radio, demanding to know why his men weren't answering. Tae-Hyun didn't wait. He placed a hand on the door handle and turned it. The door swung open. The emergency red lights in the room made everything look like it was covered in blood. Marcus was standing behind Lucas, his hand gripping the boy's shoulder. A look of pure terror on his face. He held a small handgun, but his arm was shaking so hard the barrel was dancing. "Who are you?" Marcus screamed, his voice breaking. "I have friends. I have people. You can't just walk in here." Tae-Hyun stepped into the light. His face was a mask of cold stone. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at Lucas, who was staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. The boy recognized him from the restaurant. The Ice King had actually come. "I am the man who received your note," Tae-Hyun said, his voice calm and terrifyingly quiet. He turned his gaze to Marcus, and the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "And you are the man who is about to learn that some debts can only be paid in person." Tae-Hyun didn't reach for a gun. He simply stood there, his presence filling the room like a dark cloud. He was a predator who had finally cornered his prey, and the hunt was almost over. The red emergency lights pulsed like a heartbeat against the metal walls. Marcus Matt backed into a corner, his boots scraping against the floor. He tried to point his gun at Tae-Hyun, but his hands were shaking so much the weapon looked like a toy. Lucas sat frozen on his crate, his eyes darting between the terrified bully and the calm man in the black suit. "Stay back," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "I don't know who you are, but I have friends in high places. You can't just walk in here and take my property." Tae-Hyun didn't stop walking. He didn't even flinch at the sight of the gun. He moved with a slow, heavy grace that made the room feel smaller with every step. He stopped just a few feet away, his shadow stretching across the floor until it swallowed Marcus whole. "Property?" Tae-Hyun repeated. His voice was low and smooth, but it carried a chill that made Marcus shiver. "You think a child is property because of a few pieces of paper? You think holding a knife to a boy's throat makes you a powerful man? It's business." Marcus screamed, his back hitting the cold brick wall. "His father owes me. In this city, money is power. If you have the money, you make the rules." Tae-Hyun tilted his head slightly. A small, cold smile touched his lips, but his eyes remained as hard as diamonds. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick stack of high-value bills, tied together with a gold clip. He tossed it onto the dusty desk between them. The sound of the money hitting the wood was loud in the silent room. "There is your money," Tae-Hyun said. "Every cent Daniel Reed owes you, plus the interest you were so worried about. Take it." Marcus stared at the cash, his eyes wide with greed. He reached out a shaking hand. But before his fingers could touch the paper, Tae-Hyun stepped forward and gripped Marcus's wrist. His grip was like a vice made of iron. Marcus let out a sharp cry of pain, and his gun clattered to the floor, forgotten. "You are wrong about power, Marcus," Tae-Hyun whispered, leaning in close so only the lone shark could hear him. "Power isn't about how much you can take from people who are too weak to fight back. Anyone can be a bully. Any coward can hide behind a debt." Tae-Hyun squeezed harder, and Marcus fell to his knees. "True power," Tae-Hyun continued, "is the ability to decide who lives and who dies. It is the strength to protect what matters. You are not a boss. You are just a parasite that grew too big for its host." Tae-Hyun looked over at Lucas. The boy was watching him, his mouth slightly open. For the first time, the boy didn't look terrified. He looked like he was seeing someone who could actually change the world. Tae-Hyun turned back to Marcus, his expression turning to one of pure disgust. "Take your money and leave this city tonight. If I ever see your face again, or if you ever speak the name of Daniel Reed, I will personally ensure that you become a memory. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded frantically, tears of pain and fear streaming down his face. Tae-Hyun let go of his wrist, as if he were dropping a piece of trash. Marcus scrambled to grab the money and ran out the back door into the darkness, not looking back once. The warehouse went quiet. Tae-Hyun adjusted his cuffs and took a deep breath. The ice around his heart was still there, but it felt a little thinner. He walked over to Lucas and held out a hand. It was the same hand that had broken Marcus's spirit, but now it was steady and open. "Come," Tae-Hyun said softly. "Your father is waiting." The air in the basement was thick and damp, but the silence was broken by the sound of heavy footsteps. Tae-Hyun led Lucas down a narrow set of stairs, his hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder to guide him through the shadows. At the bottom of the stairs, Minho stood next to a heavy wooden door. With a quick nod from Tae-Hyun, the lock was snapped, and the door swung open. Inside, a man sat huddled on a thin mattress. His clothes were torn, and his face was bruised. But as soon as the light hit his eyes, he jumped up. "Lucas." The man gasped, his voice thin and shaky. "Dad!" Lucas cried out. He ran past Tae-Hyun, his small sneakers slapping against the concrete floor. He threw his arms around his father's waist and held on as if he would never let go. Daniel Reed collapsed to his knees, burying his face in his son's hair, sobbing with relief. For a long minute, the only sound in the dark room was the quiet crying of a father and son who had thought they would never see each other again. Tae-Hyun stood in the doorway, watching them. He stayed in the shadows, his face unreadable. He didn't move toward them to offer a hug or a kind word. To anyone watching, he looked as cold and distant as ever. But deep inside, the memory of the closet in Seoul finally began to stop hurting. He had done what no one had done for him. He had stopped the cycle. He had broken the debt. Daniel Reed looked up, his eyes resting on the tall man in the expensive suit. He saw the power in Tae-Hyun's stance and the dangerous men standing behind him. He realized that this wasn't the police. This was something else entirely. I don't know who you are, Daniel whispered, holding Lucas tight. But thank you. How can I ever pay you back? I don't have anything left. Tae-Hyun stepped back into the hallway, his face half hidden by the darkness. The debt is gone, he said, his voice like velvet over gravel. Marcus Matt will not be coming back. Take your son and go home. Do not look for me. And do not mention my name. Lucas pulled away from his father for a second. He walked toward Tae-Hyun, stopping just a few feet away. He looked up at the Ice King, his eyes shining with a mix of fear and deep respect. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, plastic toy soldier, the only thing he had left of his own. He held it out, offering it as a gift. It was a simple thank you from a boy who had nothing else to give. Tae-Hyun looked down at the tiny green toy. His hand stayed at his side. He didn't take it. To accept the gift would be to show a crack in his armor. And he wasn't ready to let the world see that he had a heart. Keep it, Tae-Hyun said softly. You're the one who saved your father, Lucas. Never forget that a single note can change everything. Before the boy could say another word, Tae-Hyun turned around. He walked down the hallway, his long black coat fluttering behind him. He didn't look back at the reunion or the tears of joy. He moved through the warehouse like a ghost, returning to the world of black cars and secret meetings. As the SUVs roared to life outside, Tae-Hyun sat in the back of his car. He looked at his hands, the hands that had once been small and shaking in a closet, now strong enough to move mountains. He was still a predator, and he was still the Ice King, but for the first time in 30 years, the shadows of Seoul didn't feel so dark. Months had passed since the night at the warehouse, and the city felt different to Choi Tae-Hyun. He still sat in his high-back leather chair in his glass office, and he still wore suits that cost more than a small house. To the rest of the underworld, he was still the Ice King, a man of iron and shadow. But inside, the cold was no longer biting. It had turned into something else, a quiet, steady strength. One sunny afternoon, Tae-Hyun's black car slowed to a crawl near a local park. He didn't get out. He sat behind the tinted glass, watching the world go by. In the distance, he saw a familiar sight. Lucas Reed was running across a green field, kicking a soccer ball with a group of friends. His father, Daniel, sat on a nearby bench, looking healthy and relaxed. There were no more shadows under Daniel's eyes, and no more men in leather jackets lurking in the corners of their lives. Tae-Hyun watched as Lucas scored a goal and cheered, his face bright with a smile that reached his eyes. It was a simple scene, the kind of moment Tae-Hyun had never been allowed to have as a child. Seeing it now didn't make him feel sad. It made him feel powerful in a way he had never understood before. They look happy, boss, Minho said from the driver's seat, looking in the rearview mirror. The debt collector who tried to take over Marcus Matt's old territory. Well, he retired early after we had a talk with him. No one bothers that neighborhood anymore. Tae-Hyun nodded slowly. He remembered how he used to think that power was about how many people feared him. He used to think that being strong meant having the biggest gun or the most money. But as he watched Lucas play, he realized he had been wrong. Real power wasn't about the ability to destroy, it was the ability to protect. It was the strength to stand between a wolf and a lamb and say, not today. He reached into the pocket of his coat and felt the small, crumpled note he still kept with him. The red crayon was fading, but the message was clearer than ever. By answering that one plea for help, Tae-Hyun had done more than just save a family. He had saved himself. He had finally stepped out of that dark closet in Seoul and closed the door forever. He was no longer a victim of his past. He was the master of his future. Let's go, Tae-Hyun said, his voice calm and steady. As the car pulled away, he looked back one last time. He would never be a part of Lucas's life. He would never be invited to their dinners or thanked at their holidays. He would remain a shadow, a silent guardian watching from the darkness. And that was exactly how he wanted it. The Ice King didn't need a crown or a throne. He just needed to know that somewhere in the city, a little boy was sleeping soundly because a monster had decided to be a hero instead. As the car sped off into the heart of the city, Tae-Hyun realized that protecting the weak wasn't a sign of softness. It was the ultimate display of strength. The hunter had found a new purpose, and for the first time in his life, he was truly at peace.